Y es un placer poder recibirla. Hace 30 años que no venía ella a Paraguay. Da gusto realmente charlar con ella. Ella es Rebeca Bill Chávez, presidenta y CEO Inter-American Dialogue, consultora de política internacional. Anteriormente, Rebeca Bill Chávez fue Senior Fellow del Programa de Estado de Derecho del Diálogo. También se desempeñó como subsecretaria de Defensa para Asuntos del Hemisferio Occidental de Estados Unidos desde el 2013 hasta el 2016. Es miembro de la Junta Directiva de Truman Center for National Policy, del Comité Directivo del Leadership Council for Women in National Security, del Consejo Asesor del Instituto de Estudios Regionales e Internacionales de la Universidad de Princeton y del Consejo Asesor del Foreign Policy for America. Rebeca nos va a estar hablando acerca de política de Estados Unidos e inversión regional, oportunidades y desafíos. Vamos a recibirla con un fuerte aplauso a Rebeca Bill Chávez.
Good morning, distinguished guests. Buenos días a todos y todas. And a special thank you to Johnny Hildebrand and Enrique Arrua for the invitation to be here. It is such an honor to be here with you at ALIM 2024, which is happening at a very critical moment geopolitically. And I think my friend Carlos Diaz-Rosillo laid out some of the major global challenges. This is, of course, the year of elections across the globe, including in the United States. I wanted to share just a couple of things about my background that might be helpful to understand my perspective. So as was mentioned, I served in the Pentagon under President Barack Obama. I was Assistant Secretary of Defense for Western Hemisphere Affairs. I also served I led actually Kamala Harris's foreign policy team when she ran for in the presidential primaries in 2019 to 2020. So hopefully I can ask if there are any questions about that. I'm happy to answer them. I wanted to, just one thing I think that Carlos mentioned that was really important was the crisis of confidence in democracy. This isn't the focus of my talk, but I wanted to just add to what he said and give you some numbers. So 60% of interviewees or of citizens of Latin America and the Caribbean agree with the statement that democracy is the best form of government, which isn't, it's a majority, but it's not the sort of majority I think that we'd all like to see. And part of that is exactly what Carlos said. It's because democracy, in many cases, people don't think it's delivering their very basic needs. So only 40% are satisfied with how democracy is performing. So I think that's a call to all of us that we have to do better. So to the topic of the day. So first of all, I want to highlight that it's such an honor to talk to you business leaders, because you play such a vital role in one of the key industries of the Americas. Collectively, you are drivers of our hemisphere's economic development and its relationship with other parts of the world. You also have in your hands the power to address challenges to hemispheric success and to hemispheric cooperation, and broader challenges that the world faces, such as the critical issue of food security. Latin America broadly, ALIM, your individual companies and organizations, and you yourselves are central to the future of Latin America, and it's really not hard to see why. The region boasts some of the world's most fertile lands, a diverse climate that allows for a wide range of crops, a rich agricultural tradition, and agricultural innovation that makes Latin America a thriving and competitive center for production. Latin America already supplies a significant portion of the world's food, but there's room to do so much more and establish Latin America and the hemisphere as a whole as the key strategic player and leader in the future of food production, food innovation, food security, and cooperation. By investing in sustainable farming practices, improving infrastructure, and strengthening economic relationships, the countries of the Americas can boost their production, make food more accessible and affordable on a global scale, and really become the pace setters of the world's agricultural and food production. As it has already been shown, Latin America can meet its own needs and also help stabilize and enhance global food markets, contributed to a future where everyone has enough to eat. And I think I heard in the first panel that Paraguay produces more than double what it consumes, which is really quite astounding. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about where we are in the Americas. We're at a really pivotal moment in our hemispheric relationships. We stand at a crossroads where we must rethink how we engage economically to foster prosperity and stability for the next generation. So today what I want to do is outline the opportunities and challenges in US Latin America economic realms and the relationships. In so doing, I want to touch on competition with China, trade and investment, infrastructure, the impact of crime and violence, and the importance of the rule of law and judicial security, seguridad jurídica. Though the title of my talk includes the words US policy, I want to avoid us getting stuck in this idea of, or a framework that's based on sort of this US versus Latin America dichotomy. Instead, I think it's more important than ever that we view the United States as one among a diverse group of countries that comprise the hemisphere as a whole. As a hemisphere, we must all work together. The challenges that we face today, they don't respect boundaries or borders. Things like climate change, crime, violence, and illicit trafficking, the hemisphere-wide migration crisis, and pandemics. All of these issues require a multilateral approach and collaboration. It's about much more than US policy, it's about partnership. And again, it's in this context that we must work together to seize the significant opportunities to enhance hemispheric investment and trade to the mutual benefit of all countries. So to understand the current dynamics and kind of the conversations that are happening and policy discussions that are happening in Washington, D.C., we must first consider the broader geopolitical landscape, which is something that was discussed this morning. But I want to highlight that in the eyes of US policymakers from both parties, from the Republicans and from the Democrats, Latin America is seen largely as a key arena for strategic competition between the United States and China. With the US government, we have all of these strategy documents that we produce. We call it great power competition. And it's really important in all kind of government planning documents. At the same time, I think it's important to caution the US government not to reduce the relationship with the countries of the Americas to China, competition with China. It's really important that we don't fall into the Cold War trap of not recognizing the opportunities that the hemisphere offers, that our relationships should be much more than China. That being said, the US, of course, is paying close attention, and over the past 2 decades, China has expanded its presence in the region in a very significant way. China is now one of the top trading partners, in some important cases, the top trading partner for many Latin American countries, and is increasingly involved in sectors such as agriculture, infrastructure, technology, mining, and energy. And I would say that the US response up to now has been to ask the countries of the region to make a choice between the US and China, often without offering a compelling alternative to partnering with China. And this, regardless of who wins the election, this has to change. The United States must develop an affirmative agenda in the region and must engage in a much deeper and broader way. The next president must focus on offering concrete and sustainable alternatives, such as financing agreements and technology partnerships that are deep and that are long-term. And the US government has to demonstrate that the US has an enduring commitment to Latin America's development and success. In that vein, I think it's important to note that we can leverage our historical and cultural ties, our shared values, and the robust trade and investment flows that already exist to promote a vision for the hemisphere where economic growth goes hand in hand with democratic governance, environmental sustainability, and social inclusion. I want to say a bit about trade. The United States is a major trading partner for the region, importing goods ranging from agricultural products and manufactured goods to raw materials. However, the region's share of US imports has not grown significantly in recent years, and we find ourselves at a time when trade policies must adapt to changing economic realities. And in areas like agriculture, in some cases and sometimes, the reality is that the US competes directly with Latin America, sometimes posing challenges to stronger partnerships. Making this situation even more complicated is that free trade agreements are really difficult to pursue in the current political environment in the United States. There is deep skepticism in the US Congress among both Democrats and Republicans about free trade. This is something that might change over time, but really for the near term, it's the reality in which we're operating. Nevertheless, there are opportunities that we have to explore. The next US administration and other hemispheric leaders will need to find ways to build stronger and closer relationships without additional formal free trade agreements. The Biden administration has started to experiment along these lines and in this space with the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity, or APEP. Beyond this, however, the next US president will need to find other mechanisms for strengthening cooperation and economic exchange outside of the free trade context. One alternative will be bilateral economic cooperation agreements that are targeted and clear about their economic and other benefits. Another approach will be to promote strategic hemispheric cooperation through agreements that are focused on matters such as improving food security, agreements that will strengthen supply chains and infrastructure and improve market access and hemispheric economic growth, but are agreements that are not technically or primarily free trade agreements. In the agricultural space in particular, there are opportunities to explore bilateral and regional agreements on food supply designed to ensure cooperation, promote commerce and exports, and demonstrate how the Americas can work together to ensure food security throughout the world. Perhaps you all know much more about this than I do, but perhaps by agreeing to a strategic grain reserve for the Americas to help the world in times of need. One of the things that I was thinking of is that your association, ALEEM, could engage with governments to make agriculture and food security a core component of next year's Summit of the Americas, which will take place in Dominican Republic. As you all know, the region is very divided, and it's really essential that for the next Summit of the Americas, that we focus on issues where there is room for collaboration and that are not going to be politically divisive. And I think this is one area where you all can play a critical role. ALEEM could also play a leadership role in creating working groups to address climate resilience in agricultural supply chains, for example. I want to say a few words about climate change. Climate change poses one of the greatest threats, of course, to agricultural productivity and food security in our hemisphere. But it also presents an opportunity for partnership and a coordinated hemispheric response. By working together, we can develop climate-resilient agricultural practices, invest in precision farming technologies, and create early warning systems for extreme weather events. This isn't just about protecting our food supply, it's about transforming agriculture into a solution for climate change. Through joint investment in green agricultural technology, shared commitments to sustainable farming practices, and coordinated climate action, the Americas can actually become a model for the world of how to build a climate-resilient food system that ensures both food security and environmental sustainability. This is just something I want to pause here and just say for US policy more broadly, this is, I think, just one of the many opportunities of the region. And I think historically, across Democratic and Republican administrations, we've tended to look at the region through this realm of challenges and not recognize the tremendous opportunities in this region. And as you see right now during this electoral moment in the United States, much of the discussion about Latin America is driven by domestic politics in the United States, about migration, about drug policy. So I think the next administration, those of us who are in positions to maybe push, I think this is a narrative we need to push, that Latin America is about opportunities, it's not challenges, and that we actually have a lot to learn from Latin America. Another important opportunity is supply chain diversification and strengthening. This is a topic that is particularly important to the United States government, and regardless of who wins the White House, it's going to continue to be important. The COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical tensions have highlighted the risks of over-reliance on a single country or region for critical goods. Latin America, with its proximity to the United States and its wealth of resources, is an ideal partner to help diversify supply chains. Sectors such as manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, technology could see significant growth if we facilitate nearshoring opportunities. And this shift, of course, could bring tangible benefits to Latin American countries by creating jobs, by increasing exports, and driving technology transfers. Beyond trade, of course, US foreign direct investment plays a vital role in Latin America's economic development. Investments in industries like agriculture, energy, telecommunications, and financial services have helped modernize economies and create employment opportunities. Yet, of course, Latin America continues to face significant investment gaps, particularly in sectors that are crucial for long-term development, such as infrastructure, which I'll turn to in a moment, renewable energy, and digital connectivity. To close these gaps, the US needs to think beyond traditional financing models. While programs like the US International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, and the Build Back Better World initiative show promise, they really need to be scaled up significantly. We should consider public-private partnerships that can leverage government resources to attract private capital for transformative projects. Moreover, US policy should encourage investments that align with broader social and environmental goals, such as renewable energy projects and the circular economy. Latin America's vast potential in green energy, hydropower, wind, solar, and geothermal offer unique opportunities for collaboration. Supporting these sectors not only helps meet the region's growing energy needs, but also helps, of course, combat climate change, creating a win-win scenario for both economic and environmental interests. It's worth noting that Paraguay, our host, is one of the few nations in the world in which the electrical system is based almost exclusively on hydropower, a renewable and non-polluting source. Okay, turning to infrastructure, I want to say a few words about infrastructure. Latin America's infrastructure deficit is a major obstacle to growth, regional integration, and attracting investment. Insufficient transportation networks, limited access to quality healthcare in some cases, and a lagging digital infrastructure all constrain economic potential. Current spending levels are far below what is needed, resulting in a persistent gap that impedes trade, drives up logistic costs, and reduces competitiveness. According to the World Bank, East Asia and the Pacific invest about 8% of GDP in infrastructure, while Latin America and the Caribbean invest approximately 3% of GDP. The US can and should help fill this gap by collaborating with governments, with multilateral organizations like the Inter-American Development Bank, with private investors to finance high-quality infrastructure projects. And of course, as you all know, it's important to note that infrastructure gaps particularly impact the agricultural sector. Modern ports and efficient transportation networks are essential for getting your products to the market. Not investing in these areas means that we will all lose opportunities for growth. When selecting projects to support, we should prioritize those that improve regional integration, that support sustainable development, and that provide direct benefits to local communities. Initiatives like the US Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment that aim to build resilient, sustainable infrastructure worldwide, they represent a step in the right direction, but they must be fully funded and aligned with local needs. Digital infrastructure deserves particular attention. With millions of people in Latin America still lacking access to high-speed internet, there is an urgent need to close the digital divide. Expanding broadband connectivity would not only enhance economic productivity, but also, of course, improve access to education, to healthcare, fostering a more inclusive growth model. And importantly for Alim, digital infrastructure isn't just about access in general. It's about precision agriculture, it's about smart irrigation systems, it's about real-time market data that can help optimize production and distribution. The US can support this by partnering with local governments and tech companies to provide financing and technical assistance. Investment in physical infrastructure must be accompanied by investment in human capital. So I want to just this will be briefer, but I want to talk about workforce development for a minute. The rapid pace of technological change requires a workforce that is adaptable, skilled, and ready for the jobs of the future. Latin America's young population is one of its greatest assets, but it is also a challenge when millions of young people face barriers to access to quality education and training. The US should do much more to support workforce development initiatives that are aligned with the needs of the modern economy. For example, partnerships between the US and Latin American educational institutions can create programs that focus on science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, education, vocational training, and also digital skills. We must also focus on lifelong learning programs that help workers reskill and upskill as industries evolve, which they're constantly doing. By investing in education and training, we will create stronger foundation for growth and enhance the region's attractiveness as a destination for investment. Because I served in the Pentagon, I have to talk about the impact of crime and violence on investment. No discussion on economic development and investment in Latin America would be complete without addressing the challenges posed by crime and violence. And at the Inter-American Dialogue, where I am, this is a key area of focus. The statistics are sobering. Latin America and the Caribbean have the highest regional homicide rate in the world. In fact, 8 of the 10 global cities with the highest homicide rate are in Latin America and the Caribbean. And these numbers they've been really sticky. It's been really hard to address this challenge. Latin America also has the highest homicide rate, over 50%, that is actually related to organized crime. And crime costs Latin America and the Caribbean, according to the Inter-American Development, an estimated 3.5% of GDP annually. But beyond these numbers lies a complex reality that affects everything from supply chains to workforce development. For your industry in particular, organized crime poses unique challenges, from cargo theft to extortion along transportation routes. These security threats don't just impact individual businesses, they undermine entire supply chains. So I would say that at the next Summit of the Americas, security should be another issue. Citizen security should be another issue that should be front and center. And the discussion right now tends to be kind of this progressive approach that focuses on prevention and rehabilitation and kind of more the hardline, traditional security approach. Whereas I think it's really important that we meld these two groups and come up with a holistic, long-term approach to crime and violence. And this means strengthening law enforcement and justice systems. It involves addressing the root causes through economic opportunity. It involves creating safe corridors for agricultural trade. And it also means developing shared intelligence and security cooperation frameworks, which is, I think, another area for US cooperation with the region. Finally, the rule of law and governance. Carlos referred to this earlier today. The rule of law and legal certainty are fundamental pillars for a favorable investment climate. When investors have confidence in the judiciary and property rights and regulatory frameworks, they are more likely to commit to long-term resources, or more likely to increase long-term resources to a country. So we should continue supporting judicial reform efforts and anti-corruption initiatives, as these are key, not just to building stable and fair societies, but they're also key to building trust with foreign investors. So as we look to the future, the United States has a unique opportunity to redefine its economic relationship with Latin America and to work with the region to usher in a new era of prosperity and partnership. Our collaboration, our approach, must be guided by mutual respect and a shared vision for resilient, inclusive, and a sustainable hemisphere. The challenges are significant, but so are the opportunities. By addressing things like infrastructure gaps, empowering the workforce, and promoting the rule of law, we can shape a future where economic growth and democratic governance reinforce one another. This is not just an economic imperative, it's a moral one. We owe it to future generations to lay the foundation for a more connected, secure, and prosperous Americas. The time is now for leaders in both the public and private sectors to come together and seize the opportunities that lie ahead, laying the groundwork for a new era of collaboration and shared growth. Please know that you have a partner in the Inter-American dialogue as we move together along this path. Thank you. I'm also happy to, if there are questions, if any questions following on from Carlos's discussion, for example, on the Venezuelan question. Sometimes Carlos and I have different perspectives, as you can imagine. One of us worked for Trump and one of us worked for Harris. But I think you'll also note that we are very good friends, and we actually have, despite what you see in the United States, which is, yes, it's a polarized country, but we do agree on many of the fundamentals.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It's nice to have you here in Paraguay, and I hope you come back soon, not 30 years like now. Muchísimas gracias a Rebecca. Fuerte ese aplauso. Rebecca va a estar todavía con nosotros estos días por si quieren hacer alguna consulta. So yo veo if someone wants to ask you something in this day.
Y puedo entender todo, es que he perdido mi castellano un poco, mi español.
But you understand everything.
Pero entiendo todo. Me cuesta hablar a veces, pero entiendo todo.
Y hablas muy bien también.
Gracias, muy simpática.
Well. Perfecto. Voy a llevar el micrófono, así lo hacemos más fácil.
Buenos días, Rebeca, ¿cómo estás? Un gusto. Yo creo que eventualmente si alguno nos llegó a enviar las consultas por WhatsApp, podemos hacerlo así en forma más dinámica, ¿verdad? Más amena también. La consulta es la siguiente: ¿cómo podría el gobierno norteamericano, qué piensa usted, de apoyar en forma más fehaciente y en forma más agresiva la lucha contra la corrupción y el crimen organizado, principalmente en los países de Latinoamérica? Y bueno, ¿cómo podríamos hacer algo más incisivo, más fuerte, para ayudarnos a ir cortando un poco estos índices de corrupción y de crimen organizado que se tienen principalmente en países de Latinoamérica?
That's an excellent question. And I think, well, first of all, I would say the U.S. should be much more engaged. And like I said, it's critical that the U.S. has an affirmative agenda. I think that the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles was a real sign of that, where I think it could have been much more substantive than it was. So I think on both of the issue of corruption and the issue of organized crime, the U.S. can play a much more positive and helpful role collaborating with the countries of the region. On corruption, I think that this is a reference to Central America, but I think there have been cases in the past where the U.S. supported efforts like the CICIG in Guatemala. But there's a lot of, within the U.S. government, and this is actually related to the organized crime piece, strengthening the judicial branch, not just its independence, but also its efficiency, and its efficiency and its accessibility. So there are programs I think that the U.S. should and could do much more. The issue of organized crime is an important one, and it's one that when I was at the Pentagon in the Defense Department, it's one that we paid a lot of attention to, and I think it's become even more urgent today. There is assistance that the U.S. can provide, and for example, I'm going to give an example from Paraguay. There are specific tools, there is equipment and training that the U.S. can provide that I think could be beneficial. For example, radars. Because one of the biggest challenges is kind of knowing where the bad guys are. And so I would say that the U.S. should prioritize a country like Paraguay, which is such an important partner when thinking about these issues. So another issue is intelligence sharing, which there can be much more of. Something that I've spent a lot of time in Ecuador recently, because as you know, the homicide rate increased by 500%, and definitely Ecuador is a real example of the power of transnational organized crime. But also, so something that the United States has done in the past is help develop a comprehensive security strategy, and then identify what the needs are. Like what are the what we call kind of resource-based or capabilities-based planning. Like what are the specific capabilities that are needed? There, for example, Guayaquil, the port is where most of the problems are. So what sort of equipment tailored to the needs of the particular country? So this is an area where kind of bilateral talks can be very important, but this issue in general needs to be a conversation that the region as a whole has. Because things like intelligence sharing is critical. This is not a problem. This is one of those problems that doesn't respect borders. This is why I'm pushing for it to be a topic at the Summit of the Americas, because there needs to be a regional approach to this challenge.
Thank you very much. I had a question. When you look at the US over the years, and I think we've seen this sort of conversation through many presentations, I would say more than a decade ago,
Yep.
saying that Latin America is very important, that we're going to become closer partners, that we're going to develop infrastructure projects, et cetera, but the reality is that it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
What is changing that could potentially enable a change, knowing that the US has a lot of internal problems, has a lot of internal issues, huge deficit, and the reality is that China has very specific projects, very specific activities that they can develop, ports, infrastructure, et cetera. What changes that could enable that change to happen?
That's an excellent question. So before I joined the Obama administration, I was a professor of political science. I spent 20 years in the classroom focusing on US-Latin American relations and the history of Latin American relations. And for someone who focuses on the region, it's very frustrating to look at administration after administration. I'll say quite candidly, I was hoping that the Biden administration would be much more engaged than it actually was. I'm cautiously optimistic about a Harris administration based on my experience. But I think that there are a couple of factors, and one of the factors is if you look at the national security establishment in the United States, it really favors kind of Europeanists. If you look just like at the people who rise to the top historically, so I think we need to first of all create the generation of Latin Americanists who can influence policy. I think that another issue is, like you said, we get distracted. Latin America, our policy towards Latin America tends to be very ad hoc. It tends to be reactive. And your question is, you basically acknowledged that and said, well, what can we do to change? I think it's also about the narrative. So I run the Inter-American Dialogue, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. And I think a priority of the Inter-American Dialogue and our other peer organizations is to kind of create a narrative, a stronger narrative about the importance of Latin America. I think one reason the US will be paying more attention to Latin America is because of competition with China, which I think is good because it will get attention, but again, I think it should not be. We have to be careful that we don't fall into this trap where that's the only thing we think about when we look at Latin America. I think this issue of nearshoring and making the argument that US economic security should be very closely tied to the economic security of the region is another very important argument. Another is migration, and changing the conversation on migration in the United States focuses on the US southern border. And I think we know historically that no matter what we do to deter migration, it's going to continue unless the United States helps to address the root causes of migration. Right now, the US is doing that in Central America, but we need to remind policymakers that the migration crisis is hemispheric in nature, that countries for example, I think it's now around 8 million Venezuelans that have fled their country. I think close to 3 million are in Colombia, but throughout the region, countries are in many cases welcoming the Venezuelans. And so I think this argument that the US needs to address the root causes, which are economic, security, lack of security, governance issues, to really invest in those to help address this migration crisis. I think those of us who have served in government, doesn't matter what party, I think we need to be a lot louder, too, about the importance. Make a more compelling arguments about why Latin America matters. Something I'll say about President Peña is he has played a tremendous role in raising the profile of Paraguay in Washington, D.C. By meeting with members. So I think Carlos mentioned the importance of Congress, you know, meeting with congressmen from both sides of the aisle, both Republicans and Democrats. And I would say that that sort of outreach can also play a very positive role. I think Paraguay is, sadly, I think that many in the United States don't recognize that the importance it is as a partner, but I think there's also that part as the outreach from the country to the United States. But I think everyone in this room, we understand, we can make a case about the importance of the region, but it has, yeah, it's going to be tough, but I think we can do it. I think Carlos you've got me on the Democrat side, you've got Carlos on the Republican side. We will continue to do whatever we can.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Perfecto.
Rebeca, tres cosas, porque me interesa bastante, ¿verdad? Coincido contigo y coincido con el colega también. Desde hace años se viene hablando de la importancia de la inversión de los Estados Unidos, en Latinoamérica y demás. Entonces, se habló ya mucho, pero de repente me parece un poco ilógico. Es como que yo me pase tirándole piedras allá a los que están en la otra punta y me peleo con el que está en el fondo y no le hago caso a mis vecinos que están al lado. Son los vecinos de la cuadra, ¿verdad? Latinoamérica son los vecinos de la cuadra de Estados Unidos. Entonces, Estados Unidos no atiende a sus vecinos, pero está trabajando muy fuerte siempre en Europa, Asia, al otro lado del mundo, ¿verdad? Entonces, de repente parece un poco incomprensible eso. Y lo que estaba mencionando, la crisis migratoria se da porque ocurren situaciones en estos países de Latinoamérica que hacen a que la gente se esfuerce a ir a buscar nuevos horizontes, ¿verdad? Siendo que de repente, yendo un poco más allá de cerrar fronteras o cortar la migración, si se hiciese un esfuerzo, viniendo un poco más a la causa, como mencionaste, de esa migración, se puede solucionar de una esa crisis migratoria, porque si la gente está contenta en sus países, no va a tener ganas de salir de sus países, ¿verdad? O sea, eso tiene todo sentido. Difícilmente la gente quiera dejar a su familia, a sus conocidos, a sus amigos para ir a otro país a aventurarse a una vida mejor, ¿verdad? Entonces, de repente uno no comprende por qué no ocurren ese tipo de situaciones, pero bueno, habrán seguramente razones. Como acabas de mencionar, es importante seguir empujando desde nuestros países y también desde la ayuda de ustedes que comprenden esta situación, también empujar para darle una solución definitiva a muchas situaciones que finalmente se convierten en un problema también para los Estados Unidos. Dos consultitas. ¿Qué pensás sobre la situación de Venezuela? ¿Y qué pensás sobre la situación China-Taiwán? Siempre pongo el punto de Taiwán porque Paraguay es aliado y tiene relaciones diplomáticas con Taiwán, ¿verdad? Entonces, realmente preocupa un poco todo el ruido que se viene ahora y lo que mencionó Carlos también, que es cuestión de tiempo. En algún momento China va a tomar Taiwán, entonces, ¿qué hacemos? ¿Qué pasa mientras? Entonces, básicamente esas dos consultas, una posición sobre Venezuela y segundo, China-Taiwán.
So I'll start with the second question. I agree with Carlos on China-Taiwan and the likelihood that China will actually take action at some point. The question is when. I would say that sometimes there's a sense that the Democrats aren't as kind of alarmed about this reality, and what I will say is that's not true. I think this is one of the rare areas of bipartisan consensus in the United States, where both Democrats and Republicans see eye to eye on the dangers of China. So I don't think if we, regardless of who wins the election, we will have a president that is committed to Taiwan. On Venezuela, I'm glad you asked me about that. I think I actually kind of asked you to ask me about that, so thank you. So I know that Carlos pointed to the failure of the policies under the Biden administration. And I don't want to defend them, but I want to explain them, or the logic behind them. The logic behind them was that the maximum pressure campaign under the Trump administration, it didn't work. The saber rattling, this idea that we're going to invade. In fact, I testified before Congress about why a US invasion of Venezuela is a bad idea. But like Carlos said, I think that's off the table. But the maximum pressure campaign didn't work. What it did do is they didn't cause the humanitarian crisis, but they exacerbated it. Of course, we want Maduro out, but that didn't work. And so what the Biden administration did, and I think there was a positive result. And I think the result was, if that had not happened, I don't think there would have been an election in which Maria Corina Machado would have been the clear winner with evidence. And I think that is an important difference from Guaido, that they were able to collect the actas, that the Carter Center was there to monitor the election and to make a clear statement that we have the evidence that she won by a wide margin. I think that is really important. What I'm disappointed in is the response of the region. I think in the case of Guatemala, when there were the attempts to prevent Bernardo Arévalo from assuming the presidency, the region really came together. The OAS, made its statement. This didn't happen with Venezuela, which is a real shame. But I think it's important that it exposed Maduro in a way that there is no doubt that he is a thug, that he is a dictator, that he, in a way that we didn't have in the past, because we have this evidence. It's interesting because I've talked to a couple of Venezuelan pollsters recently, and I am skeptical about the sectoral sanctions and about their utility, because we saw that they didn't work. Today in Venezuela, over 60% of the populations oppose sectoral sanctions because of the impact on their lives. They make life even more difficult. So I don't know what's going to happen with the election, but I would say that it's very important for the US to really consider, when thinking about reinstating the maximum pressure campaign, what are the impacts? Like, really weigh them carefully. Are they going to result in Maduro? He's got his workarounds, right? He's got China, he's got other countries that help him work around these sanctions. Are they going to work? If not, what is the impact in Venezuela on the people? So that's my answer. And it's not that I disagree in any way that Maduro is the cause of this crisis in Venezuela, but we have to just be we have to have a clear discussion about the costs and benefits of sectoral sanctions.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure